This is Jesus Christ speaking, Matthew 5:17. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So first of all, God expects us to keep His commandments. To keep His commandments. Now look at Romans chapter 3. People will often say, well, no, that was the Old Testament, that God had all those commandments. But in the New Testament, we're just under grace, we're free in Christ, anything goes. That is so not true. That is such a false doctrine. You see, the grace of Christ is what brings salvation to all men. But it does not make void the law of God. Faith in Christ does not nullify God's laws as being something He demands of us after we're saved. Let me prove it to you in Romans 3. Romans 3 is a great chapter on salvation by faith. It goes on and on about it. Like, for example, in verse 28 when it says, therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. He says, no works, just faith. But look at the last verse of the chapter, verse 31. He says, do we then make void the law through faith?
No.
God forbid. Yea, we establish the law. He says, we don't make void the law through faith. Now, he said, if salvation come by the law, go down to chapter 4. Chapter 4, verse number, let me find my place here. Verse 14, Romans 4:14 says this, for if they which are of the law be heirs, faith is made void, and the promise made of none effect. He says, look, if salvation is by works, if salvation is by keeping the law, then faith is made void. But he said, if salvation is by faith, that does not make the law void. He said, do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yea, we establish the law. Jesus Christ did not come to destroy the law or the prophets. He came to fulfill. He said, you need to teach people to keep these commandments. And the Bible is filled with hundreds and hundreds of commandments. And God expects you today as His child to keep His commandments. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Keep the commandments. You say, well, I just believe if we love, that's it. This is what He said. For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments, and His commandments are not grievous. 1 John 5:3. 2 John says this, and this is love, that we walk after His commandments. This is the commandment that, as you've heard from the beginning, ye should walk in it. Our love for God is measured by how much we walk in His commandments. By how much we keep His commandments. Now, there's a lot of false teaching out there that wants to throw out the whole Old Testament. Now look, parts of the Old Testament have been changed. Those parts are clearly spelled out in the book of Hebrews. He says that we're not under the Levitical priesthood. Anything involving the priesthood, he said all the carnal or physical ordinances, the meats, the drinks, the things that had to do with food, the things that had to do with washings. Read the book of Hebrews and he spells out a lot of things that have been changed from the Old Testament to the New. But does that mean that we just throw out 80% of the Bible and say, oh, that's all Old Testament? No, when God said in Deuteronomy 22:5, a woman shall not wear that which pertaineth to a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are an abomination of the Lord thy God. That hasn't changed. If God commanded in the Old Testament that men should not wear women's clothing and that women should not wear men's clothing, oh, that's Old Testament. Yeah, and it's God's law, and God is against our wicked cross-dressing transgender society. I'm sick of it. And don't try to make void God's laws or you'll be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. We need to establish God's laws. There is a right and wrong that has existed all the way from Adam and Eve until now. It's always been wrong to steal. It's always been wrong to lie. It's always been wrong to be cross-dressed. It's always been wrong to fornicate. It's always been wrong to commit adultery. It's always been wrong to murder. It's always been wrong. It's always been wrong to covet, to steal, to lie, to cheat, to do all these things. Because God has eternal, unchanging laws of right and wrong. And they've always been so, and we ought to live by those laws. It's commanded of us. He expects us. He requires us to keep His commandments. Now, how are you going to know God's commandments if you don't read the Bible?
Right.
You know, and this is where you have to read the whole Bible cover to cover to get all the commandments. He said, He showed thee, O man, what is good and what doth the Lord require of thee. It's all there in the Bible, but you have to read it. You have to find it.